How did people endure severe Arctic winters in dwellings crafted from wood and earth, with temperatures plummeting tens of degrees below zero? We envisioned Viking settlements blanketed in snow and battered by icy gusts. Yet, history reveals that these communities not only persisted but flourished. Their success wasn't magic, but rather remarkably effective engineering, where each component of the house, from its foundation to its roof, formed an integrated system for heat retention. It was more than just a house. It was a strategically designed thermal fortress, built in harmony with the harsh northern environment. Stay tuned to discover how the Vikings transformed the frosty adversary into an ally, and why their homes surpassed many contemporary buildings in warmth. I will unveil their most closely guarded secret. The Viking dwelling, famously known as the longhouse, was not merely a structure. It was a living entity. Scandinavians, who spent half their lives at sea, applied shipbuilding principles to land, fashioning a distinctive architectural style. These houses, some extending to 30 meters and occasionally 80 meters, featured walls curved like the sides of a long ship. This design wasn't merely aesthetic. It was a strategic defense against the relentless northern winds, allowing air currents to flow around the edifice rather than striking it head-on. The entire communal existence unfolded under one colossal roof. Within this expansive area, there were no distinct rooms in the contemporary sense. Everyone resided here: the family patriarch, his relatives, laborers, and even enslaved individuals. Such communal living was not only a social imperative, but also a crucial element of thermoregulation, as dozens of people within a confined space generated a substantial amount of heat. The longhouse, or longhus, was conceived as a singular organism, a self-sufficient ark capable of enduring many months of winter. Its orientation was meticulously planned according to cardinal directions to minimize heat loss. Entrances were almost never placed on the end walls, which bore the brunt of the elements, but were instead discreetly positioned in long side walls, often with specialized extensions. The walls of this earth ship were substantial and multi-layered. The Vikings did not solely rely on wood, which, despite being a valuable resource in the harsh climate, was not the most effective insulator. They engineered a complex sandwich of materials, with each layer performing a specific function, transforming the dwelling into something akin to a modern thermos. This technique, refined over centuries, ensured that precious heat remained trapped inside. The foundation consisted of a robust wooden framework of vertical posts that supported the immense weight of the roof. These posts, frequently fashioned from solid pine or oak trunks, were deeply embedded in the ground. The spaces between them were filled not with thin boards, but with far more efficacious materials provided by nature itself. We eagerly await your perspective. What are your thoughts on this concept of a ship house, where an entire community coexists under one roof like a single crew? Share your views in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our upcoming episodes on ancient technologies. Are you prepared to uncover the truth about the materials the Vikings actually used for their wooden homes? When we envision a Viking house, we often picture a log cabin, similar to those found in forested areas. However, in many regions, such as Iceland or Greenland, wood was incredibly scarce. Consequently, the Vikings developed a construction method that minimized wood usage, relying predominantly on other, far more accessible materials. The house's core was its frame. This was the only part where wood was indispensable. Sturdy pillars of oak, pine, or birch formed the building's skeleton, bearing the entire load of the roof and walls. Yet the walls themselves were not made of wood in the familiar sense. They were more akin to earthen walls, which was the primary secret to their thermal efficiency. Before erecting the frame, the Vikings prepared the foundation. They laid a perimeter of large flat stones around the footprint of the future house. This stone base served two critical purposes. First, it leveled the ground, and second, and more importantly, it insulated the wooden frame from the damp earth, thereby preventing rot. Wooden posts were then placed on this stone foundation. The gaps between these posts were filled with the most crucial insulating material of the Viking Age: turf. Turf, or peat, was composed of layers of earth tightly bound by grass roots. It was cut into large rectangular blocks, resembling giant bricks. These sawed bricks were stacked to construct incredibly thick walls. At the base, such a wall could measure up to 1.5 and sometimes even 2 meters thick. The wall tapered towards the top, which enhanced its stability. The blocks were often laid in a herringbone pattern or interlocked to ensure maximum density and eliminate gaps. Such a turf wall possessed phenomenal thermal insulation properties. The porous structure of the soil, permeated with roots, retained numerous small air pockets. It was this stagnant air that acted as the superior insulator, operating on the same principle as modern foam, plastic, or mineral wool. Turf was a living material. In the spring, the exterior of such a wall would sprout grass, making the house appear like a natural hill, seamlessly blending into the landscape. This grass further reinforced the wall, binding the turf blocks with new roots. The house literally became an extension of the earth. How effective do you believe this combination of natural materials was compared to contemporary alternatives? But what if I told you that fire wasn't the sole source of heat within the house? In the upcoming segment, we will reveal the secret of living heating employed by the Vikings. What I am about to show you was commonplace for Vikings, but would be astonishing to people today. They cohabited with dozens of animals. This was not a sign of savagery or impoverishment, but rather an ingenious engineering solution that conserved fuel and enabled them to survive the most brutal winters. The longhouse served not only as a human dwelling, but also as a winter barn. These two functions were inextricably linked. The interior of the house was distinctly divided into two zones: living and working. Roughly half, and occasionally more than half, of the house was dedicated to stalls for livestock. Cows, sheep, goats, and horses, the principal assets of any Scandinavian family, spent their winters here. The absence of separate animal shelters was not a whim, but a meticulously planned survival strategy. The living area and the barn, or fjós, were typically separated by a simple wooden partition. This partition was not airtight. It merely delineated boundaries, but permitted air and heat to circulate freely between the two sections of the house. People and animals, in essence, breathed the same air under the same roof. The genius of this system lay in simple physics. Any large animal, such as a cow, generates a substantial amount of heat throughout its life. A dozen cows in an enclosed space constituted a complete heating system, operating continuously and entirely free of charge. The heat produced by livestock was as vital a resource as firewood or peat. The floor level in the residential section of the house was often slightly elevated compared to the barn. This was done not just for hygiene, to prevent waste from the barn from entering the living area. Warm air from the animals, adhering to the laws of convection, rose and naturally moved into the higher living area of the house, blending with the heat from the hearth. The animals, in turn, benefited equally from this proximity. In such a harsh climate, a separate barn would succumb to freezing temperatures, resulting in livestock mortality. By sharing a roof with humans and receiving some of the hearth's warmth, the animals were reliably protected from the cold. It was a true symbiosis, mutually beneficial. Of course, such close quarters had their drawbacks, primarily the odor. However, for people of that era, the smells of livestock were an accustomed part of life and did not elicit the same aversion as they do for modern urban dwellers. Warmth and survival far outweighed olfactory comfort. Additionally, the constant activity of the hearth and its smoke partially mitigated the smells. If you find this method ingeniously simple, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos about how people survived the harsh conditions of the Middle Ages. Do you wish to learn the secret that enabled Vikings to stay warm without glass windows? The primary adversary of any warm northern home is not the cold itself as much as the wind. Wind draws precious heat out through the tiniest crevices, creating drafts. The entire architecture of the longhouse was designed with a singular purpose: to minimize uncontrolled airflow. The first thing one notices when observing longhouses is the almost complete lack of windows. Glass was exceptionally rare and luxurious during that era, exclusively reserved for church construction. Ordinary homes were devoid of this light source. Occasionally, tiny slits were cut into the walls, but in winter, these were tightly sealed with moss, straw, or wooden plugs. Life within such a home transpired in perpetual dimness, relieved only by the fire in the central hearth. This was a deliberate sacrifice made for the sake of heat preservation. The Norsemen recognized that any opening primarily represented a breach in their dwelling's thermal defenses, opting for obscurity over cold. Occasional roof apertures, rather than windows, provided light and ventilation, though these will be discussed separately. Regarding entry points, their design received meticulous attention. Doors, being the vulnerability of any home, prompted the Vikings to devise a comprehensive strategy to mitigate this risk. Longhouse doors were invariably quite low, necessitating a considerable stoop for a modern individual to enter. This design not only compelled visitors to show deference to the residents, but also drastically reduced the ingress of frigid air when the door was ajar. The low threshold acted as an effective barrier against much of the icy draft. The doors themselves were massive, crafted from stout planks and sealed tightly against the frame. Unlike conventional hinged doors, they pivoted on powerful wooden pins embedded in grooves on the threshold and upper lintel. This construction ensured maximum sealing and eliminated gaps. Often, entrances were not direct. A small antechamber or vestibule was erected preceding the main door, serving as a primary line of defense. One would first step into this unheated space, secure the outer door, and only then proceed through a second inner door into the living area. This airlock, or heat trap system, proved remarkably efficient. It prevented the biting wind from directly entering the warmed interior. While in the vestibule, occupants had the opportunity to shed snow, thus confining cold and moisture to the outside of the second barrier. The placement of entrances was also deliberate. They were rarely situated opposite each other to prevent cross drafts sweeping through the dwelling. Most often, entries were located in the longer walls, sheltered from prevailing winter winds. Occasionally, an entrance received additional protection from a projecting wall section or an earthen embankment. Can you imagine subsisting in near total darkness for months? In the subsequent section, we will delve into the heart of the home, the source that supplied not only warmth but also the sole illumination. The central hearth served as the longhouse's essence, its sole and primary fount of sustenance. Unlike the compact stoves or fireplaces we are familiar with, the Viking hearth, or langheld, was a broad, shallow trench spanning the entire central axis of the living quarters. It could extend up to 10 to 15 meters, enabling it to adequately warm a vast area. This hearth was not merely a fire on the ground. Its edges were lined with substantial stones, fulfilling multiple roles. Firstly, they contained the blaze. Secondly, these stones absorbed and then gradually and uniformly released a significant amount of heat into the space, performing as a large thermal battery. Wood was the primary fuel, but in regions devoid of trees, such as Iceland, peat was extensively utilized. Peat burned slowly, emitted consistent heat, and was readily available. Harvesting peat for winter was a critical communal task, as survival directly depended on it. The long hearth was a multifaceted apparatus. Primarily, it provided warmth. Its elongated conformation allowed for an even distribution of heat throughout the living area. People sat on benches along the walls, each receiving a share of the vital warmth from this central heating element. The hearth's second crucial function was illumination. In a windowless house, the landgeld was the only light source. Its flickering flames cast light upon faces, carved wooden posts, and wisping smoke near the ceiling. All domestic life revolved around this illuminated space. Naturally, the hearth also served as the kitchen. Large cauldrons, suspended over the fire on special chains or tripods, held food prepared for the entire household. Here, Soups and porridges were cooked, and meat was roasted. The aroma of cooking mingled with the scent of smoke and livestock, crafting the distinctive ambiance of a Viking home. What if I told you the Vikings lacked chimneys, yet did not succumb to smoke inhalation? The presence of a massive open hearth in the dwelling center presented a considerable challenge for builders. How could combustion byproducts be expelled without losing all the warmth? The solution to this dilemma was as straightforward and ingenious as the house's overall design. The familiar brick chimneys and flues did not exist then. Smoke from the long hearth ascended freely, accumulating directly beneath the roof. The entire elevated space of the house, above human height, became filled with a dense, hot, and pungent layer of smoke. This generated an unexpected benefit. Hot smoke and soot constantly impregnated the roof's wooden beams and rafters. This process, akin to smoking, constituted an excellent preservative. It eradicated wood-boring insects and shielded the timber from decay, substantially prolonging the structure's lifespan. Of course, the smoke had to dissipate somewhere. For this purpose, specific openings, known as leora, were created at the roof's apex, directly above the hearth. These openings served both ventilation and lighting functions. It was the sole provider of daylight inside the house, apart from an open door. The leora was not merely a hole in the roof. It possessed a specialized design allowing for adjustment. Most frequently, it comprised a wooden frame that could be partially or entirely covered with a custom shield or lid. A long pole stationed by the hearth controlled this cover. Manipulating this damper was a true skill. During winter, it remained almost entirely closed, leaving only a slender gap. This allowed the densest smoke to escape while preserving as much warm air inside as possible. Air quality, which was heavy and smoke-laden within the house, had to be compromised. Do you believe maintaining this equilibrium between fire and air was difficult? However, the roof did not merely release smoke. It also served as the primary shield. In the next chapter, we will uncover why Viking roofs were alive. The longhouse roof was as critical for thermal retention as its sturdy walls. It embodied a complex, multi-layered construction engineered to bear immense weight, repel water, and, most importantly, retain heat. Akin to the walls, the roof was living, being built using turf. The roof rested upon a robust wooden rafter framework. Battens fashioned from thinner poles or planks were laid across these rafters. This wooden decking formed the initial layer, yet by itself, it offered no defense against precipitation or cold. The true protection commenced atop this base. The subsequent and one of the most vital layers was waterproofing. The Vikings skillfully employed birch bark for this purpose. The bark was meticulously removed in large sheets and arranged on the wooden decking like overlapping tiles, ensuring water would flow off without penetrating inwards. Birch bark naturally contains resins that render it virtually waterproof. Above the birch bark layer, the primary insulation consisted of turf. The methodology mirrored that used for wall construction. 2 or even 3 layers of turf blocks were placed on the roof. This heavy earthen mantle could weigh several tons, demanding exceptional strength from the house's wooden framework. The roof turf served several functions simultaneously. Firstly, it acted as an outstanding insulator, which, like the walls, kept warmth within the dwelling. A thick layer of earth prevented heat from escaping upwards, instead reflecting it back into the interior. In winter, it formed a warm cap for the house. Secondly, the turf shielded the delicate birch bark layer from mechanical damage and, significantly, from direct sunlight, which could dry it out and make it brittle. The earth provided a robust casing for the waterproofing layer. Thirdly, this layer was alive. Over time, grass began to grow on the roof, transforming it into a verdant lawn. The roots of this grass further bound the turf blocks together, fashioning a singular, durable, and monolithic covering. The house literally integrated into its surrounding landscape. The Vikings inhabited a climate where snow could persist for 6 to 8 months of the year. While heavy snowfall poses a challenge for contemporary society, for the Scandinavians, It was another component of their intricate survival system.
They did not contend with the snow, but utilized it as a readily available and exceedingly effective insulator. The very architecture of the house was designed to capture snow. Long, sloping roofs, smoothly transitioning into thick turf walls, lacked sharp angles. When snow fell, the wind created massive drifts that accumulated against the house walls and on the roof. The dwelling gradually disappeared beneath a deep blanket of snow. Drifts against the walls could reach the roof, completely obscuring the earthen walls. From the exterior, the settlement appeared as a cluster of mounds, from which only smoke vents and vestibule entrances were visible. The Vikings were in no haste to excavate their homes from under this snowy covering. They understood perfectly well that snow is one of the finest natural insulators. The secret of snow lies in the air trapped between the snowflakes. This stationary air prevents heat from escaping and cold from infiltrating. It operated on the same principle as an Eskimo igloo. A layer of compacted snow, 1 meter thick or more, created an additional thermal cocoon around the house. This encasement completely enveloped the dwelling, sealing the final apertures through which the wind might intrude. Beneath this snowy armor, the temperature at the Earth's surface and within the house's walls remained steady at approximately 0 degrees Celsius, even when a blizzard raged outside and the temperature plummeted to 30 degrees Celsius below zero. The snow served as a buffer, mitigating abrupt temperature fluctuations and safeguarding the turf from deep freezing. Consequently, the house's thermal defense was multi-layered. The initial line of defense was the wooden framework. The second comprised thick walls and a turf-covered roof. The third, outermost layer of protection was a substantial blanket of snow. This entire cohesive system functioned to retain the warmth generated by the hearth and the livestock within. What was life like inside this warm yet dim and smoke-filled sanctuary? The inner configuration of the longhouse was as logical as its external design. The whole area was structured for optimal convenience and heat retention. The primary interior feature consisted of benches or platforms. Along both extended walls from the byre to the end partition, wide elevated platforms were constructed. These were fashioned from wood and decked with planks. These platforms constituted the primary living space. Individuals sat on them during daylight hours, performed tasks on them, and slept on them at night. This arrangement was not arbitrary. The floor inside the house was earthen and cold. The chilliest air invariably descends. By elevating the living area 1/2 meter above the floor plane, the Vikings avoided the discomfort zone. It was considerably warmer at the level of the benches. The expanse between the benches accommodated an earthen floor and a lengthy hearth centrally located. This is where people traversed, prepared meals, and tended the fire. All daily activities occurred on 2 distinct levels: the active passageway below and the elevated living decks on either side. This configuration resembled a ship's interior. At night, the family would slumber on these benches, utilizing animal hides and woolen coverings. People frequently slept in their daily garments to maintain warmth. Enslaved individuals and servants might sleep on the floor near the hearth or even in the utility area closer to the animals. Winter days were brief, and the house lacked windows. The sole sources of illumination were the hearth and possibly a small smoke vent in the roof. Therefore, for most of the time, the house was in semi-darkness. It required time for one's vision to adapt to this dimness. The longhouse was the epicenter of life, but it was not the sole structure in the settlement. For certain endeavors, particularly those involving fire or requiring discretion, separate, smaller buildings were erected. And in their construction, the Vikings also applied their knowledge of thermal conservation. One of the most crucial structures was the smithy. Maintaining a forge within a dwelling brimming with dry wood, straw, and dozens of people was excessively perilous. The danger of conflagration was immense. Consequently, smithies were always situated at a safe remove from the main habitation. To facilitate work in the smithy during winter, it was often constructed following the Grubenhaus principle, or as a semi-subterranean dwelling. The building was partially or even entirely excavated into the ground. The walls were formed by the earth itself, which was then lined with planks. The roof was low and frequently covered with turf. Such a pit excelled at retaining heat. Firstly, it was shielded from the wind. Secondly, it harnessed geothermal energy. At a depth of 1 meter, the ground does not freeze as significantly as on the surface. The forge itself provided sufficient heat to warm this small subterranean chamber. Other workshops were often built using the same semi-dugout method. For instance, weaving workshops, where a specific humidity level was vital for processing wool, or carpentry workshops. Excavating into the ground was a universal method for establishing a stable microclimate. In some settlements, evidence of small bathing houses or steam rooms has also been uncovered. These structures were analogous to smithies, small, often subterranean, with a substantial hearth piled with stones. The stones were heated and then drenched with water to generate steam. These small buildings complemented the settlement's heating paradigm. The longhouse functioned as a warm base for dwelling and slumber, while specialized underground workshops permitted craft activities to persist without jeopardizing the safety and thermal equilibrium of the primary residence. We can discern that the Viking longhouse was a true marvel of engineering. It was not merely an edifice, but a complex, integrated system where every component contributed to a shared objective: preserving life through the Arctic winter. Robust turf walls, a living roof, warmth from livestock, ingenious smoke management, and the utilization of snow as insulation were all integral parts of a unified strategy. What other mysteries of the Viking era would you like to unravel? Perhaps you are intrigued by their shipbuilding, weaponry, or mythology. Please suggest topics for forthcoming videos that you would wish to see in the comment section. Remember to subscribe to our channel to catch all our upcoming adventures into the unknown.